Margaret Mead, born 1901, a US-American social anthropologist. And she brought out, for example, two major books. One is Coming of Age in Samoa, 1929, and Growing Up in New Guinea, 1931. And she was researching and studying childhood and adolescence, specifically in the Pacific. And she was focusing on the individual and how the society is affecting that individual, rather than so much on how the society is. So more how the society is affecting an individual instead of the whole society. And she was then arguing, for example, that it was not the individual causing strain or stress with the society, but the form of the culture and society. And then she also was arguing that, for example, in Samoa, she's saying that the people were not having a special ceremony regarding puberty, and also no negative stigmatization regarding pre-marital sex. And she argued then that that was a reason that the people were easier growing up from childhood into adolescence. That is according to the Reader's Digest Library of Modern Knowledge, Book 2, Part 8, Man and Society, written by C.R. Beddock, Hugh Jocelyn, Emily Cole, Peter Loyce, Lucy Mayer, David Martin, Jacqueline Sarsberg, Ruth DeVitos, and J.C. Woodburn on the page 452 in the year 1978. The positions and views expressed are the ones of the source and don't necessarily align with my own or with the ones of the entities spoken. Hi, welcome. I am trying to learn anthropology today. Margaret Mead, and after we've done it, we're gonna do neck stretching. And if you participate in the neck stretching, then it's already honest. And the book is from the 1970s. Margaret Mead, born 1901, an American social anthropologist noted for her pioneering studies of childhood and adolescence in Pacific communities. So she was observing how people were living in the Pacific, and she observed there how people lived in their childhood and in their adolescence time. Her studies, which were controversial at the time but are now accepted, in the 1970s, emphasize the individual and what the culture does to him or her, rather than the society or culture itself. So it is no argumentation so far. I think I try to understand this, just saying that she was looking on what the culture, how the culture was influencing a person, rather than to look how the culture is itself, of the society itself. She also stressed that it is cultural differences rather than innate individual characteristics which cause social strain and stress. So she was saying that the social stress and social strains are not because of the individual person, but because of a society. In her two major books, Coming of Age in Samoa, 1929, and Growing Up in New Guinea, 1931, Margaret Mead stressed the ways in which social roles are learned by children in particular societies, and how their personalities are molded. I think that means formed. Molded. So she made two books, 1929 and 1931, and there she said, Coming of Age in Samoa and Growing Up in New Guinea, where she wrote about how people or children are molded by the societies in which they live. Social roles are learned by the children, and how that molds their personalities. Let's look up what mold means. Mold, to shed or cast the feathers, hair, skin, horns, as birds and other animals do. Most commonly used of birds, but also of crabs and serpents, to shed or cast its feathers, hair, skin, to act of molding, to shedding or changing of feathers. Molder, to turn to dust by natural decay. And how their personalities are molded. Molded, written with a D. Okay, I don't know what it means. I think she means at least how they are formed. I think molded must mean something like formed, and if not, I think it is meant with it. Okay. She argued, for instance, that in Samoa, where puberty was not made the subject of a special ceremony, and pre-martial sex was seen as perfectly natural, children grew up with minimal social or sexual stress, and the transition from childhood to adolescence was a smooth one. No, I'm a little bit wondering, is she arguing in one of her books or whatever, somewhere, that the people in the society of Samoa were not having, as she argues, sexual stress because these two reasons named here? Or is it just an addition which the book is saying she argued that, and by the way, in Samoa there's that and that? So the question is basically, was that her argument that these two things were there, as she says, or the book says, that people do not, as she says, having stress growing up, or to become out of age, or whatever the term is, to become out of age? Or is it just an adding of a book, just like what we could add, and that is the capital of Samoa? I don't know where Samoa is. But I think we understand what is meant here. So, Margaret Mead, born 1901, American social anthropologist, and she pioneered in studies for childhood, adolescence, and coming of age in Pacific communities. And at the time more controversial, but when the book was written in the 1970s, they were accepted. Were focused on how an individual is shaped by the culture around him, rather than how the society or the culture is. And she said that the social stresses, social strains in society, or social strains which are arousing, are not the fault or cause through the individual, but rather through the society itself, or cultural differences. But I think that means societies. She also stressed that it is cultural difference rather than individual characteristics which cause social strain and stress. I think in this case we could say I think it's easier to understand, I think. As she wrote the book Coming of Age in Samoa, 1929, growing up in New Guinea, 1931. And there she stressed how personalities are molded, whatever that means, and how social roles are learned by the children. And she also argued with, for example, in Samoa, that there were people, because of differences in the society, the book names them too, that pre-martial sex is not, how should we express it, seen as adverse the norm. And the other thing was that there is also no special ceremony to reach adulthood, or where puberty was not made the subject of a special ceremony. The people would not have social or sexual stress. Okay, that is a bit a lot. Let's try it. Maybe we're going to make a second part. Margaret Mead, born in 1901, an American anthropologist, and she was pioneering in her focusing on the societies in the Pacific where the children and the adolescents people were living in the society. And she argued that Java. Okay, that's not good. I have completely have the two things here. Margaret Mead, born 1901, an American social anthropologist. And she was pioneering in looking at how the children and adolescents people were living in the Pacific. And she then was focusing rather on how the individual person is living there. Maybe we should make a second. What it was, let's just make it clear what it was. It was the individual and what the culture does to him or her, rather than the society or culture itself. I'm gonna make a second part. If you were here for social not just for anthropology. If you were here for anthropology, you can go directly to the next part of anthropology. Then we'll continue with Margaret. Maybe we're gonna say it. I'm just not able to sort it right now. We're gonna do the presentation. If you stay here and participate in the next stretching, that's better. Go and stand and stand. Breathe in and reach to the sides. And in and reach out front. High up. And arms to the sides, circle around. Change to the leg. Hands down. And stand calm, breathe in, shoulders back, tall up. And out, turn the head over to one shoulder and the chin down to the shoulder. Breathe in, lift the gaze and turn the head over to the other side. Breathe out, chin onto the shoulder. Breathe, lift the gaze, back over to the other side and circle over again. Breathe in, halfway out and then circle back and back into the and have feet standing together. Intertwine the fingers behind the back, tall up, shoulders back, breathe in. And out, turn the head over to one shoulder, chin down to the shoulder, and pull the hands down to the ground. In the shoulder up, and over to the other side. Breathe in. Out, chin down to the shoulder. Pull the hands down to the ground. In with the gaze. Back into the legs width apart, intertwine the fingers behind the back. Over to one side, tall up, breathe in. Out, head over to the shoulder with the hands up, chin down to the shoulder, and pull the other shoulder in and down. Breathe in, lift the gaze over to the other side. Hands over to the other side. Breathe in. Out, chin down to the shoulder, pull an arm in and down over the shoulder. Lift the gaze, back into the middle. And have the feet same together. One arm behind the back and the other one up. Out, bring my head over. Breathe in. Out, look to the hand on top of the head. Hand down, arm behind the back. In, other one arm up. Out, bring it over. Breathe in. Out, look up to the hand. Have the palms together, elbows together, in and reach high. Out and down. In and up. Out and down. And have feet standing, first the arms back. And out in front. In and back. Out in front. And back. Have the feet standing together and in the arms up. Out, lean back, arms down. In and up. Out, lean back again. In and up. And lean to the side. In and up. Out over to the other side. In and up. And intertwine the fingers and reach high. Breathe out and reach in front. In and up. Out in front. And back with long arms. In and up. in the arms up. Bring the hands to touch and lower down to heart center. Now I think the moor is just northwest of Australia. 2,000 kilometers is northwest. East of Australia. There's a moor. And molding, I think molding is something from forging, where the hot metal is put in or something. If you were here for what was it? The neck stretching. But it was the neck stretching. Thank you very much.